Really, has your mindset changed when you're looking at early stage founders? What are you looking at when you're talking to them around the product?
Probably the first thing you're looking for is, we are here to support companies. We're not here to create companies, but we are here to support the new companies that emerge.
With regard to failure, if somebody comes in and says, I'm looking to start up this new company, by the way, previously started up a new company, it didn't work out, but we did hit this metric, and this metric. That's a big plus. You have to learn to crawl before you can walk.
Particularly in the case of B2C, what I'm always most interested in is, in the case of like a B2B solution, you can validate that by lining up your first customer, by talking to them, by conducting a pilot with them. In the case of B2C, you don't just have to validate the solution, you have to validate also the route to market.
If you're talking about the industry and how can the industry really push on and scale up, then we need to see companies that have the ambition to grow across new markets, bring in the funding to get from kind of 10 million in sales to 50 million in sales, and then to 200 million in sales. To make that next step, then we need to move away from being the acquired towards being the acquirers.
Billy, welcome to the pod. We're really excited to have you here, right? You saw the FinTech anyway from the start, where we started in Ireland and where we are. You guys have the European view as well. So I'm really looking forward to unpacking a lot of insights here for our viewers, right? Well, Billy, before we jump into it, as we do normally here, can you give us a bit of flavor of your background, right? Where you started?
Sure.
And how you end up Enterprise Island, and then we can deep dive from there.
Yeah, will do, Hesus. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me onto the show. I've known you for a long time. We've always had good conversations whenever we meet. And you're certainly somebody who'd be very well respected, a go-to for us if we want to get industry opinions. You've helped me out a lot in the past. I really appreciate that. I'm delighted to be on the show. I've been in financial services for a long time now. I don't like to think about it. But before Enterprise Ireland, I worked primarily in the fund management industry and stockbroking industry in Ireland. So when I came out of college, fund management was quite a big local industry. There would have been about 15 or 20 fund managers around Dublin associated with each of the various large banks, each of the various large kind of mortgage companies or life assurance companies, and then with some of the kind of the Aircom pension fund or things like that. So you would meet people around town who were investing in the ISEC, and this was, when it was, we didn't have the single currency, so there was a really good scene then around that. Socially, you got great exposure to companies. You were meeting companies like Kerry Group or Kingspan or Smurfit, Bank of Ireland, CRH. You're spending time with the senior management teams of these companies. And it was all, I suppose, I wouldn't quite say pre-internet, but it was at a time when, there were no video calls. It was all face-to-face that companies would, come into your office, sit with you for an hour rather than doing it online, that sort of stuff. So I worked in that industry for a good number of years. And that is, I would feel a lot of it is gone now through consolidation. A lot of these companies have been acquired. For example, the really big asset manager in Dublin at that time was Bank of Ireland Asset Management, and that was a huge international success. Most of the local asset managers were only local, but most of these companies have now been acquired and backed into international entities. So that industry kind of doesn't exist anymore in the same way. From there, I went into stockbroking, private client stockbroking in Goodbody Stockbrokers and in NCB Stockbrokers. And also in Dahlman Stockbrokers, which was a fantastic job, actually, a great place to work. That industry, again, went through a very difficult period when, I don't know if you remember, the financial crisis. Yeah. So there was the financial crash, and every day we were looking at the the S&P falling another 7%, and you're thinking, oh my God, it can't really, it just did, So that was obviously a very difficult period for an awful lot of Irish people. It was a very difficult period in financial services industry in Ireland. From there, I spotted this opportunity, was advertised at the time, to work on the financial services team in Enterprise Ireland. And sure, I said, I'll try this, see what it's like. And as it transpired, I mean, what I would say is that while it is on the face of it a very different type of organization to work for, the actual nuts and bolts of the job that I do, which is meeting with companies, trying to understand what they do, trying to understand their marketplaces, early stage companies or SMEs, it's actually quite similar to the work that I would have done all those years ago in New Ireland Investment Managers in my first job. That the difference is that back then we were dealing with companies worth 4 billion, whereas now you're dealing with, in some cases, companies that are pre-revenue. So the scale is very different, but the concept itself is quite similar. So there is an arc to the story there,
Billy, like you said, it's about people, right? It's about making people understand the businesses, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
the background is translatable.
Yeah.
So you went in and you started building an ecosystem around fintech as well, right? So that's one of the remits of many that you have in there, right?
Yeah.
So tell us some stories about that journey of building.
Well, that's sort of the job interview. I said, guys, I have this idea. I'm going to build an ecosystem. No. When I came into this role, my colleague Michael Brown,
yes.
and we've been on the same team for a long time together. It was a financial services sector that we were dealing with. Most of the companies were licensed financial services companies. Many of them are still clients, but it was a financial services sector. It wasn't being pitched as being a fintech sector. What happened is, I suppose, you had various strands of change, a lot of it emanating from the financial crash. For example, like probably primary example would be in the RegTech space. That because so much new regulation was introduced around that time, and because banks were really struggling to deal with it, there was therefore an emerging need, and companies stepped in to fill that need. And what is the best way that we can meet the requirements associated with these new rules? There's so many of them. Technology is the best way to do it. And that would be a good example. And there was a number of parallels to that, but that would be a good example. So we are here to support companies, and we're not here to create companies, but we are here to support the new companies that emerge. And yes, absolutely, an awful lot of fintechs have emerged in the past 15 years or so.
So, Billy, said organically we saw the RegTech evolving, right? And
then,
as you say, then after was the payments as well evolving in a way as in the Irish ecosystem. And how you see it mature now?
Well, that's an interesting thing. Like, again, when I came into the role, we probably had a kind of a barbell situation where we had, on the one hand, a number of very large clients, such as Fexco. And on the other hand, we had a number of very early stage startups, and not necessarily huge amount in between in the fintech space. But in terms of the maturity of the industry or of the vertical over the past, decade-ish or more, probably that's what we've seen is a filling out of the industry, so that we have companies at all stages of the life cycle. We continue to have new exciting companies, but now we have those scaling companies in the middle that are now the ones that we saw in 2013, 2014, people like Fundrex or like AQmetrics or
Mm,
Corelytics or Risk System, the companies that emerged then are now scaling. They're now at 40, 50, 60 people. They're at 3, 4, 5, 6 million of sales. They're making acquisitions, things like that. So it's really
mm,
exciting. We continue to have large companies or companies that were scaling then are now large. Carn Group would be a good example of that.
mm.
Global Shares, which was recently acquired, would be another similar company in that category. And then we have the very early stage companies. And I'd say we have as many, there hasn't been a fall off there at all. We were seeing as many startups probably as we ever did.
And the scale-ups, that's a very interesting one, right? As
Yeah,
you see mature, and even the scale-ups now going into that acquisitions play, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But Billy, at early stages, when as your mindset changes when you're looking at early stage founders, what are you looking at when you're talking to them around their product, around their growth strategy, their vision? As it changed predominantly when you started, and now because now you've probably there's more insights in the ecosystem where we can actually play as island, etc.
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. He says,
Mm,
like I am a domain specialist, but fintech, as
mm,
you know, is so broad and it
mm.
can be so focused on a tiny little
Yes.
part of a really huge industry that
Mm,
it isn't necessarily the case that I'll be able to, sometimes if, with my fund management background or whatever it is, I can look at this and have a really good, clear view of whether something is a genuine market need or not.
mm.
But to go back on your question, how are we assessing very early stage companies when they
Yeah,
come
when
in?
they come and knock at
Yeah,
your door, say, Billy,
yeah, yeah,
I had
yeah.
this idea.
If I could put it to you this way, uh, probably the first thing you're looking for is somebody is presenting a proposition that
Mm,
they can come up with a solution that will meet a market need. And that's
yes.
every startup anywhere, not
Mm,
just in fintech. However, in fintech, your market need isn't selling lemonade outside a football stadium. It's
exactly.
it's selling complex, a lot of the time technical solutions to risk averse large organizations.
Mm,
So therefore, and I can't necessarily say will a large organization have that need or not, but I
mm.
do know that they'll take a long time thinking about it,
Sales cycle, right?
but so what you're looking at then, and what you referred back to yourself there is, you know, does this person have the credibility to deliver on what
Mm,
they are going to say, what they're saying they're going to do?
yes.
And the very first point then, it's not credibility isn't kind of can they spin a good yarn, can they get up and talk? It's that's important, but
Mm,
do they have the domain knowledge? That would be the very
mm,
first thing I would be looking for. If you are saying you are going to sell a complex regtech solution to the fund management industry, and your background is that you worked I don't know, for Paddy Power or something like that, then
mm.
there's a question mark.
Yes.
If and that's no disrespect to Paddy Power,
By the
it's
power.
just like it's a wonderful
Can't forget
organization.
that.
But you see my point.
Mm,
If your background is completely unaligned with what you're talking about doing,
mm,
that creates a mismatch, or sorry, a question mark for me.
mm,
Whereas on the other hand, if you are coming at it from a position where you're saying, yes, there is a big problem in this industry, and I know
mm,
because I was senior vice president of this London bank, or I was the chief underwriting officer for a reinsurance company in the
mm.
IFSC. And by the way, you can talk to all the people who worked with me as well. So that would be
Yes.
probably the first thing, the
Reference point.
domain knowledge. And it's not just probably in fintech or in financial services that, like, normally the companies we see,
Mm,
they are either a fintech solution, as in they are selling technology to the financial services industry, or they are financial services companies that rely heavily on technology to compete.
Yes.
So both can be kind of called fintech, but there is a distinct kind of difference between the two. And so, with regard to domain knowledge, it's that kind of do you have the financial services domain knowledge in the particular vertical you're talking about? And do you have the technology capability and sometimes also the compliance capability needed to deliver this solution? So, therefore, a look at the team itself, a bit of a deep dive. So, just for very early stage companies, for example, that may be listening or watching.
They're taking notes right now.
Yeah.
They're taking notes right now, Billy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, like, be specific about how your background prepares you for this. Don't be vague. Spell it out. I know how to do this because I worked in this role. Don't work. My career has yada yada yada, and I don't even say where I worked. That's one of the first things I'd be looking at.
Billy, you mentioned it there, right? The compliance elements, right?
Yeah,
We're
okay.
going to talk about compliance. We're going to talk about, we're not going to go down in that rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
the compliance and also the regulatory aspect when it comes to authorization. So the sales cycle
Sure.
is a bit longer.
Sure.
How do you think as an industry we're actually matured and understanding, as you said, fintech's quite different. So like, selling lemonade, building now apps, right?
Yeah, sure.
Go out there. How does, in your view, the industry has understood the difference now? And they're treating the startups, they're going into the space potentially with a different lens, right, through the years.
Do you mean with regard to
funding and also understanding the timelines that takes to execute something like this, right?
Yeah. I don't mean to be evasive, but that depends to some degree on the type of startup you're talking about. Does it need to be regulated? Does it not need to be regulated? How much capital can the team bring in themselves? Those sort of questions.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, the type of investor you are talking to. Are you talking to a VC? Are you talking to a high net worth? Are you talking to others? But to try to answer your question, the first thing I'd say is that financial services startups and fintech startups are at somewhat of a disadvantage because of the very, very, as you know, high barrier to entry associated with the need for a regulatory license. And, that is undoubtedly a challenge for a lot of startups. However, once you have that license, then it demonstrates a lot. It demonstrates, first of all, that you are able to pass all the fitness and probity tests the central bank require and carry out. It demonstrates that the due diligence that the central bank has conducted on your business plan, that you are adequately capitalized, all of those things. So it's kind of more than the sum of the parts, if you know what I mean, that as a demonstrator, a central bank license it provides a big advantage then to a startup once it's in place. So you can look at it both ways, I think, in terms of, it's an awful pain for these companies. They have to go and get licensed. If you do get licensed, it gives you a huge push, particularly if you get licensed for a solution that is innovative and that your authorization is somewhat innovative as a result, because it's a new type of solution, and that would give an awful lot of comfort to investors, and you will see a lot of funding rounds for early stage companies will be conditional on that license being in place. Now to
You know, I was going
go on, yeah.
to, I was going to double click on that one. So, Billy, you answered it because I was going to say the regulated ones, right?
Yeah, go on.
That regulated part is actually different than you answered it. Billy, one of the things that I always believe that, okay, our Central Bank of Ireland, everyone says it's very hard to get through that process. But once you get that process, you said, Billy, it's like a gold plate, right? That means that you have all the box in order, the house in order.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's not going to make you money. It's not going to win you customers. You know, you do have to go out and execute on the business plan nonetheless. But it is a really big validation of the team and the proposition, and it will, by and large, add value to the company, and
Yes.
it will certainly support companies in their conversations with investors.
And Billy, what advice do you give like to early entrepreneurs when you start working with them? I guess common ones you say, okay, actually, these are the top three, insights that I normally say, guys.
Top three.
Is that or you can go more than three,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, I mean, form a view early on. If you look, I wouldn't say these are the top three. These are just things that are coming
In
into
your
my
mind.
head, right?
Yes.
Well, one would be, and we don't see this so much anymore, but I used to see it quite a bit. People go in early doors with B2C solutions, and
Yes.
they come
Yes.
up with a solution that's B2C,
Yes.
and founders a lot of the time. Are very focused on the product. And when I meet them, they're very excited about the product. Let's talk about them. We've got all this technical design around it. It's brilliant. We can do all this, and particularly in the case of B2C, what I'm always most interested in is, yeah, that's nice, but who's going to buy it off you?
Yes.
Who's the first customer going to be? Um, and in the case of like a B2B solution, you can validate that by lining up your first customer, by talking to them, by conducting a pilot with them. In the case of B2C, that's a lot more challenging because you're not just validating that one person wants it. You need to validate that you can sell it to 100,000 or 100 million
Market.
people, and that's a challenge. So that what I wouldn't say don't do B2C. However, I would say go into it with your eyes open, that you don't just have to validate the solution, you have to validate also the route to market, which is very, very challenging.
Yes.
And the second thing is that companies early stage can make very flippant assumptions about how they're going to use influencers, and they're going to do whatever, and that will just bring in people. Like, it is very, very costly, so that if you are developing that type of a solution, you need a lot of capital, by and
Yes.
large. Okay, so what I've seen in the past is that companies frequently migrate from a B2C solution after 2 or 3 or 4 years to a B2B2C solution, and that's what happens. And then how quick is that journey? What else? That's number one.
Is it a lot there to unpack, right?
Okay.
Billy, because the B2C model, a lot of people say in Ireland is not looked in favor because you said the capital that it takes to actually
Yeah.
execute the go-to-market
One
strategy
other
is quite
point
hard.
that we don't have, like, we're not Germany. We don't have
Yeah.
80 million people, or whatever.
Population, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and there's a reason, therefore, why we don't produce, like, for example, a large amount of B2C fintechs.
And you bang on there, but also that there has to, when you look at the ecosystem, there has to be the VC, as you mentioned already as well, supporting those solutions, right? Because you need someone that has that risk appetite
Yeah.
for those type of go-to-market strategies, and they're willing to deploy. So
Yeah.
you have to look at the whole value chain and what you have at your disposal.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I would imagine the issue, and I suppose I don't want to speak for the VCs, but I would imagine the issue is that there's a chicken and egg for the VCs with commercial traction, but you
Yes.
can't deliver commercial traction until you have large amount of funding in the B2C space. So we all love the idea, but not until you're making money, you know.
And that even segueing into that as well, because you mentioned already the commercial, the bottom line, right?
Yeah, sure.
And now we're turning a cycle. We're going to a cycle. A lot of the venture capital are looking at profitability.
Yeah.
Right. I guess from your perspective, when you look at the business, Billy, do you always look at okay, when potentially they can get the profitability? Is there a commercial model here they can get stock in, or is it, or someone comes into you? Let's go big or go home.
Yeah, well, you know, I know what you mean. Like, it would be certainly a challenge for us if a company came in and said, we're not going to make any money in the first 6 years. You know,
we'll figure it out.
Yeah, we're just going to be developing tech for the next 3 years, and then we'll have a look. Yeah, I wouldn't say we're too hung up. To go back to a point we discussed earlier, all those companies that emerged, say, out of the FinTech, the RegTech kind of boom, if you want to call it,
Yes,
back in 2012, 2013, 2014. We had a lot of startup companies then. And like the legal definition of a startup, of a young company in EU terms, is under 5 years. Very, very, very few of those companies would have been break even within 5 years. And if you look at it, you start up, you kind of design your solution, technical build, bring team together. Then if you need to be regulated, you make a central bank application. And you tell me how long that takes. But it could be year 2, year 3 before your product is even ready to go. And then you're trying to scale it up. And then, you know, another thing we didn't really touch on, you know, in terms of advice for very early stage companies, but product market fit. You know, there very frequently is a period, whether it's a short period or a long period, and it's usually a long period of trying to find the right fit between what we have developed and what the market wants, and what do we need to do to tweak our product, to change our product, to make it more aligned with what the market wants, you know. So product market fit, investment in that, investment in optimizing sales processes, all those sort of things, that can be a big part of the early stage as well. I can't remember the question.
Even on that one, Billy, like, you know, one of the things that before was around the tech, right? I love this conversation. I was saying we're going to segue. There's no real track on this.
Yeah, sure.
You talked about initially it was really about the technology, having technical capabilities, and I think that's key, right? Well, I think what as well is coming out to the fore over the past few years is that commercial capability as well to execute, that you mentioned. So now that's coming more to the front. But of course, you have to have the tech. What are your views there, Billy? Because it's interesting because that's what you led with as well. The credibility to execute in this area, right? Less about the technology, but of course, you have to be able to build what you say you want to build, right?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose one piece of advice is kind of put yourself in the shoes of the buyer. And I know that's a bit cliched, but
you have to empathize. You have to empathize. Empathy is a huge thing.
You have to kind of figure out what are they buying. And one of the things, particularly if you're dealing with a large organization, is kind of if we deal with these guys and it goes wrong, you know. So you know, it's not just about the technical solution. I remember a couple of years ago we ran a competitive start fund. And so this is support. At the time, it was 50,000 euros for companies that were at a very early stage of ideation, usually pre-revenue. Most of them didn't need to be regulated, if I recall rightly. but they were, involved in technical build and maybe a bit of going out and talking to customers with a view to down the line are emerging from the competitive start fund, having their first customer, hopefully, and doing a larger funding round or whatever it is. And we ran a few of these just before COVID, I suppose, that were focused on fintech and financial services. And this is a program that invests in cohorts of 10 companies. And at the time, for one of the rounds of FinTech Competitive Start Fund, we partnered with Citibank and Ulster Bank. And they were both very, very supportive in terms of the time that they gave to our companies. And we organized a series of kind of seminars that, we'd hoped would accelerate their journey towards not towards profitability, but even just towards their first customer.
Yes.
And it would have focused on things like procurement. They may like the idea, but how do you get through the procurement? It would have focused on compliance issues, compliance requirements for the type of solution, would have focused on license applications for central banks. So, not so much on how do I build my product or how do I raise more money, but a lot of those other, how do I optimize my sales strategy, that sort of thing. And probably a learning from that at the time was that the very, very early stage companies weren't that interested in all those things and didn't show up. And I was like, God, we've nobody coming to these, So I went out to the wider cohort of companies that were 4, 5, 6 years old, that had been through the funding round and, had the license and whatever, but they were actually in the real world of trying to sell the thing. And I'd phoned up everybody they knew. And these people thought it was great. They really, really loved it,
Yes. And that's the thing, Bill. You need those modules. You need the compliance. You need to understand the procurement. And you mentioned something there about risk and reward, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we can have a very good solution, but then the person you're selling to is looking at, as it said, well, if it goes wrong, is it worth the risk, right?
Yeah.
And it's essentially constantly balancing. Are you still actually on the back end creating those synergies to potential clients for the people on the pipeline? Talk to us a bit of that journey, because I thought they're very innovative, actually bringing two banks in, right? An international bank and a local bank, one can say, and say, okay, if you want to go through this process with this type of clients, these are the things you have to have in place, right, to play.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, there was probably a particularly large amount of early stage companies, but we do continue to see them. So, as you probably know, this year, like, for example, we ran, or we shouldn't say, we partnered with Middle Game, who ran a really, really good accelerator for early stage fintechs. And that worked out really well. Some great companies on it, got a lot of good value from it. So we are doing that sort of thing. And for the wider startup community, we have a thing called our high potential startups. These are companies we invest equity into at an early stage. So we have, so the acronym there is HBSU. We have a thing called HBSU Forum, which brings together the founders of these companies once a quarter with the other founders of that quarter, if you like, and introduces them to people, like in a way that I described there, who will talk to them about these are the challenges you will face as you're trying to scale up your business towards your first couple of clients or whatever it is. So those can be really good supports. I mean, definitely like one observation, and you know this a lot better than I do. I would have of people who start up new fintech companies, new financials, or any company. Like, it's a really brave thing to do. You're taking a lot of risk. You're really backing yourself and therefore kind of exposing yourself to failure. You have to put on a bright face for everybody you meet, for
Yeah.
your staff who you're come on into this, wonderful early stage company. I don't know if we'll be here in 4 weeks. For your investors, for the regulator,
Mhm.
for Enterprise Ireland, and it can be a lonely place.
Yes.
So that's why I think these types of programs are really, really good, even if they're not kind of you're a fintech, will help you sell into Bank of America or whatever it is. It's not
Mm.
as prescriptive of that, but there can be a lot of soft support and a lot of soft benefits that you can take from them as an early stage company.
I love the idea from the founder, that peer group
Yeah.
going. It's really, really super. Billy, but you touched on something there around failure, right?
Okay.
As a society, Ireland, we deal with it in a different way. Some countries celebrate failure, right?
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so.
How do you think we will evolve as a nation, and even from your view? Maybe you say, okay, there's always a second chance. There might be a third chance for individuals. How do you think we'll evolve dealing with failure in the entrepreneur space? I think have we progressed, or what's your views on it?
I'm not doing the role this long to say if we've progressed. You're in a 10 year, you probably want to be looking at it over 30 or 40 years to see if we culturally changed.
5 years is 30 years in the startup world.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it just depends on the resilience of the individual and how they can deal with it. But if somebody comes in to us, like when we were talking earlier on about what are the characteristics that you're looking in for in your founder, one would be domain knowledge in, say, in this conversation, financial services space, technical capability. Are you able to access investors, other investors? Who's your team, advisors, all that sort of stuff. Like one very fundamental piece I'd be looking for is, have you any idea how to run a startup? And if you're coming out of a big institution, to create a startup, I mean, it works very, very, to state the obvious, it works differently. And with regard to failure, I can only speak for myself when I say that if somebody comes in and says, I'm looking to start up this new company, by the way, I previously started up a new company. It didn't work out, but we did hit this metric, and this metric. Then that's a big plus, because by and large, a lot of the things that can go wrong then.
Yes.
When you're coming back again. So how the individual deals with it, that's kind of depends on their makeup and character and so on. But from personal point of view, from an Enterprise Ireland point of view, it's a good thing if you are, if you demonstrate that aptitude for entrepreneurialism.
I think we're getting better at it. As you said, Billy,
Yeah.
it's one of those things, the journey, right? If someone is
Yeah.
honest and say, actually, this is what I learned. In
Yeah.
America, it's pretty much like, fail fast, right? Learn, go on to the next. And of course, we're in Europe, it's not about failing fast that they can learn is that. But I think we're getting there now as an ecosystem,
Well,
mindset.
that could be a thing, that we don't fail quickly. That
No, we don't.
early stage companies, when it's not working, they can often just drag on and on and on and on and on, instead of, okay, let's just shut this down, move
And
on
do you
to the
think,
next
Billy,
one.
that stems for the bit of the fear of saying, okay, I failed, right? So they try to
Could be.
drag it.
It could be. It could be out of a sense of obligation to the investors. It could be just because there's capital in the business. Let's deploy it, even if we're not that confident. I mean, it is loads of things that could be down to. Yeah.
I think it's a long journey. You do sports, Bill. You cycle, right? So is that how you get some of your downtime as well, right? Because I think in a way entrepreneurship is like sports, being able to go the journey, right? Being able to unpack a lot of things. It's a lonely journey as well at times, as you mentioned, right? So how has that helped you as well?
I'd say. If I was to look for a sporting analogy,
right?
it would be the team coach rather than the player. The player just comes in and trains and then goes out on Saturday or Sunday and plays the game. And they can be disappointed with the performance, they can be happy with the performance, but then they go off and do whatever. Whereas the coach is thinking about it all the
All
time.
the time.
The coach is getting a phone call on Friday night, oh, I got making him sick or whatever, The coach is trying to figure out, like, long-term vision. Do we want to win the cup or whatever? So it's probably that's a closer for me analogy.
And we also
And
talk about
also,
the
sorry, and with entrepreneurialism, you're the coach of a team that has, this is a sport that never existed before.
It's a new one, right? It is evolving all the time, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We talked a lot of, even like in Ireland, around rugby, how we,
Yeah.
we're small and then we punch above our weight in rugby.
Yeah.
Do you feel that now we're starting to have that ambition and punching above our weight in the entrepreneurial sphere, Billy, from the
I
FinTech
think
perspective?
so. I think there's a good culture here. And again, I kind of principally want to talk about the fintech and financial services space, because that's my area. But a thing that I kind of continually would hark back to is the very, very strong domain knowledge that exists in Ireland that gives a very natural advantage to the founder once they start. Because and that's kind of, it mightn't feel that way, but it's a comparative thing, really, that we have so many large banks here compared to other European countries. Maybe not compared to London, which we often compare ourselves to, but compared to Slovenia, or compared to Seville or somewhere like that. So that gives us a really big advantage in the fintech space. And then in terms of the entrepreneurial side of the fintech culture, a lot of that then is, number one, the building out of the industry, so that you've got companies at all stages of the life cycle, so that a founder who is starting up can point to all these other Irish companies that have scaled up. It's like the thing in women's sport. If you can't see it, you can't be it. And once you see it, you can visualize, well, this is the journey that these guys took. And that's an option for us that we mightn't have thought of. So, that creates a vibrant ecosystem.
I'm big into bets, Billy, right? And your background around FinTech, we have to deep dive on that, right? Do you think that the potential for Ireland to actually play quite well in the FinTech space? Because we haven't seen a lot emerging in that area, but we do have a lot of funds in domiciled here, right? So if you place in a couple of bets, and I know you have to caveat that, right? Because some people might start building businesses in that area,
sure,
right? But what are the areas you see for? You talked about IFSC that built us actually creating synergies. What are some areas that you of interest that you think I would love to see more things happening in this particular space?
Yeah, I mean, again, I go back to something we discussed earlier, which is it a company selling a technology solution? Is it a company that is financial services but trying to compete through technology? And perhaps in the funds area, it's the latter that we can see. That I think, and this doesn't just apply in funds, but it can apply throughout financial services, that a lot of large institutions within the fund space, the services they provided aren't on the cloud, they're legacy, they're not best in class, and that new entrants, by introducing technology that is emerging, by capitalizing on the flexibility that this brings and on the array of services they can provide through new technology, the speed of onboarding, all those things. There is an opportunity for new entrants to compete on that basis. And that is something Ireland can capitalize, that is something that new entrants based out of Dublin can capitalize on, because all those other advantages that we've always, in recent years had in financial services will still be there. English language, proximity to London as a large market, the strong reputation of the local central bank. It's all of those things together, and then what can we bring to the mix to capitalize on that.
And I'm gonna double click on it because for the first time, Billy, I think we're taking bets as Ireland, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like there was a bet on AI. There's an ambassador now for AI, right? Which is
All right,
fantastic.
go on, yeah.
When I saw that, I was like, that's great.
Okay.
And it seems like we're taking a bet also on digital assets, right?
Okay.
So I'm gonna nudge you again, Bill. I'm gonna try and get
Go on, yeah.
the areas that you think that there might be potential, or technologies, right? You think we can actually play a very good part as Ireland, right?
Yeah. Look at my background is in financial services. I'm not a tech guy. I wouldn't be the go-to person for what's cutting edge in AI or whatever it is. But having said that, my personal view would be this: that companies buy products and services, and the technology it's built on is kind of second to the quality of the product or the service that they are procuring. So just by being built on AI doesn't make something a good idea. It is what are you delivering? So had that a couple of years ago. Haven't had it in recent years, but people come in and say we're a blockchain company. What do you actually do?
What's the problem?
Forget
the problem.
So, but what we're seeing now is, companies coming in and saying we're a digital assets company. How do you deliver that? We deliver through the blockchain. So we're seeing a kind of a maturity of, say, in the blockchain space. Control Alt would be a great example of that.
Yes,
of companies. Using the existing technologies to make impactful solutions, deliver impactful solutions within the framework of a regulated space.
I always believe start with the problem and then forget about the technology and then see how the technology can enable to solve the problem in a more effective manner. And Billy, on that then, because Israel, for example, because of their historical background, right? They know credible cyber story, right? I think Ireland there's potential to have a very good fintech story because the IFSC, we have to reinvent ourselves. We had that crash. Right. I think this could be a good way to also optimize ourselves for IFSC 2.0 or 3.0. How do you see that evolving, Billy?
And again, that's like
next 5 years.
You can spend an hour talking about this.
Yes.
But the scaling piece is huge here. Okay, we have the companies, we have the capabilities. The international markets are out there. How do we meet? How do we get those two to meet? So that would be one huge element of it. And earlier this year, we were over in Amsterdam for Money 2020. I think we had the guts of 30 companies over there. So the Irish cohort at Money 2020, if people don't know, is probably the biggest, is it? I don't know, FinTech event in Europe.
On the agenda.
And we had 30 companies, and we had a big government presence at it, supporting those companies with events, with stands, and so on. So we'll do similar in a couple of weeks in Singapore for the Singapore FinTech Festival. So it is having that ambition to really scale across multiple markets. And that's not an overnight thing. I mean, I don't want to see, I never want to see companies say, oh, yeah, we'll go out to Singapore. You have to learn to crawl before you can walk. But nonetheless, if you're talking about the industry and how can the industry really push on and scale up, then we need to see companies that have the ambition to grow across new markets, bring in the funding to get from kind of 10 million in sales to 50 million in sales, and then to 200 million in sales. So that would be certainly how the industry can transition over the next 10 years.
I love that piece about the internationalization,
Yeah,
be it at European level, but also at, outside Europe, be it
yeah.
Asia. We're seeing as well, you guys win a big push, Billy, in New York, US,
Yeah,
right?
we do. We've a really good team in New York. So we've a number of offices in the United States. Enterprise Ireland
Mm,
has a number of offices in the United States. However, the fintech sector would be
yes,
supported through New York. If you want to talk about fintech, don't go to our
San
Austin
Francisco.
office or whatever. Go to our New York office as a starting point.
Mm,
And we run a lot of events out of there. I know that Money 2020 in Las Vegas
yes.
is on shortly, and Enterprise Ireland will have a presence there. We work closely with Ireland Funds. This is the Irish America based organization
Mm.
that supports kind of a Wall Street 50, who are the top Irish people in Wall Street. A lot of our fintech
Oh, nice.
companies would appear in that. And then another organization we work quite closely with is called InsurTech NY.
Oh,
So
New York,
we've
yeah.
been partnering with those guys in recent years, and they have their conference, I think, in March. So we'll hopefully partner with them again around that. And I know we had a cohort of insurtechs in New York. One of them, I don't know if you recall that story, Kana, won
Yes, Kana.
the
Second,
best.
second time,
Yeah,
for Paul, right?
exactly. Yeah. So best emerging fintech, and that was, quite a good outcome, given that there were a lot of startup companies at that event, and we delighted to say a Cork-based company winning best emerging startup. Yeah, it was brilliant, and like, I mean, that's something we didn't touch on so much, but
The regionalization. Let's talk about it, Billy,
yeah,
because
okay, yeah, sure,
let's definitely double click on that because
yeah,
of course Dublin is all about a lot of ecosystem development that happened in Dublin for fintech perspective, but now it's expanding and we're
yeah.
seeing you mentioned Cork, Galway, Kerry. And Enterprise have done a lovely piece on that as well, right? So it'd be good for the listeners to understand how that regionalization strategy was executed in a way.
Well, start at the start on our own team here in Enterprise Ireland that deals with financial services and fintech.
Mm,
We have people in Dublin, we've people in Galway, we've people in Cork. So we're dealing at a local level with
mm,
fintechs in those areas and throughout the country. But my point is that it's not just Dublin centric. From the point of view of the industry itself, you're right, companies all over the country. Uh, if we were to talk about clusters of
mm.
companies, the primary, obviously, apart from Dublin, the primary one for me anyway would probably be in the southeast of the
Southeast,
country.
yes.
And I did an exercise a couple of years ago with a company that wanted to set up a new regional office. They were concerned about Dublin just being at capacity for office space, for hiring. They're concerned about Brexit and how UK banks were going to come into Dublin and hoover up all the staff, all this sort of stuff. So it was kind of like a hedge
Mm,
for them, an insurance policy for them. They were going to open a second office.
mm,
And we did an exercise where we went to various centres around the country to evaluate. And one kind of learning I would have taken from that, I suppose, is that one of the things we did was, in Sligo, in Athlone, in Galway, Limerick, Waterford, went all over, looked at all these.
mm,
This company wanted to evaluate all these different locations, and one learning I took from that was that if you're, say, based in Kilkenny, that doesn't
mm.
mean you're hiring people in Kilkenny. You're bringing in people from all over.
Yes.
And they could be coming from Thurles, they could be coming from Waterford or Carlow or wherever it is. So outside of Dublin, you're talking about hinterlands for me
Mm,
as being clusters. So in the southeast, to go back to where I started, you've got fintechs and financial services in Kilkenny, in Wexford, in Waterford, in
mm,
Clonmel. There's a big cluster, and they're competing for talent, which is brilliant. And to some degree, if you are a person they're competing for, say a compliance officer or something like that, you
mm.
can live in rural Kilkenny and work in any of those places. And to go back to the very start of it, that probably didn't exist 30 years ago. That if you wanted to work in financial services, you only worked in Dublin or you worked in London. Whereas now we have all those jobs in the regions, and not just in the southeast. Like Global Shares there in Clonakilty, employing kind of 400 people in Cork. They're providing. There weren't many compliance officers in Clonakilty back in the day.
You won't associate Clonakilty with compliance officer, compliance, let's say talent development, right?
Yeah.
Well, Billy, one of the things you mentioned as well is that insurtech pitch, right?
Yeah, sure.
I want to just unpack that before we leave as well, the growth of the insurtech industry. Because we've seen it from the start when we had like 3 or 4 companies knocking around, right?
Yeah.
To now actually a good movement around that particular space with it, as you said, companies at all levels, startups, scale-ups, some more mature ones because I remember the banks now say they actually fintechs. So some of the insurers are saying they're insurtechs as well themselves, right? So some insurers as well in that space build some very good technology.
Sure.
Can you unpack what's happening from the inside?
Yeah, again, normally what we see with fintechs, and to some degree it applies with insurtechs, is that they kind of follow one of 2 patterns a lot of the time, not all the time, but one would be that they are selling to a market segment that is not well served by incumbents. So it's not a very large market segment, but it's not well served. People are Excel based or they're working off old systems and that sort of stuff. And the new entrant is bringing in best in class. So Global Shares would have been a really good example of that. That we are specialists in your space. You're not having to deal with some massive fintech of which you are just a tiny piece. We are specialists in your space, and we are bringing you best in class technology. So it's not that it's massively innovative, but it's effective. And then so an example of that would be Code East. Company supplying to the MGA, the managing general agent, or that category in the UK and the US, and then the alternative would be that you are addressing the wider, sort of larger insurance market, and you're taking a small part of this, and you're trying to fix a problem that large insurance companies have. And in the insurtech space, that could be somebody like Yonder. It could be a wide variety of companies. So there are 2 ways. But to go back to the start, what is your domain knowledge? How can you identify what the market gap is here? And also, do you have the credibility, particularly in insurtech, because we know they're pretty risk averse, and large traditional organizations, they know they have to change, but they don't want to.
Risk reward, right?
So do you have the capability to really sell to these people?
And do you think, Billy, from seeing this from the start, past 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Have we matured and are we creating more insurtech solutions? Because we're not going to go into the area of sandboxes. We have a sandbox on our insurtech space, but I'm wondering, are we seeing more appetite, right, which enables the ecosystem to develop, right? So I always package the fintech into insurtech into fintech in a way, right? Because just
100%, it's another vertical, no 2 ways about that,
I think, what are you seeing, Billy? Are we maturing that vertical itself? Is it mature? Is it growing?
I mean, the good thing, like just referring back to what you said there, is that when we talk about the insurtech space, you can have companies that are pure insurtech and they only do selling to insurance, but you can also bring into that as a cluster companies that conduct KYC or AML, and they can sell to insurance, they can sell to banks, they can sell to a wide variety. So there's a number of different ways you can slice and dice insurtech. However, the more of the entirety of these you have, then the more you have what looks like a cluster. And to your point, another very important part of the ecosystem would be kind of the industry bodies and industry groups. And so with that in mind, it's been great to see Gary Layden and the work that's gone on at Instech, which is a collaboration within the insurance industry and supported by the insurance industry. And they're doing great work in just focusing on that one area and bringing together emerging companies in that one area. So that's an important part of, it's not just having a series of companies, but what do you do with, to bring as a group that makes sense for all of them,
And I think you guys started leading the thinking a bit there, because there were maps going around, right? And a lot of people were just focusing on, companies addressing problems of insurance. To say, I'm selling this insurance solution, be it an MGA hardcore solution, be it the claims hardcore solution, right?
Sure.
But I think you guys started to really showcasing the problems that the industry has with KRIC. Because it was one of the earlier ones that I went to. You guys presented that, the KYC solution, AML solution, because insurance company has those problems as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to broaden the scope of solutions, because everyone's facing similar problems in financial services. It's about presenting those solutions to the financial.
100%. There are kind of generic problems that a wide variety of financial services companies face, and then they're very specific within your own vertical problems. So there are a number of ways to slice and dice it.
I knew this was going to be a great conversation, Billy, but before I go, I have two questions for you, right? One is like the tactical advice that you give, right? Someone raising capital. I know we're going potentially some people are looking at downturn, etc. But what some tactical advice do you give an entrepreneur raising capital, be it in a downturn or a stable environment?
Yeah, tactical advice. Touching something earlier, which is just articulate how your background relates to the proposition that you're building out, and be specific about that. Make it clear that I worked at this with that company, and that helps me to deliver this type of solution. Not just I have a good idea, that would be one. In terms of very early stage, just a personal thing. It's great to have the massive ambition and all that sort of stuff, but I also want to know the next steps. Where will your first customer come from? How are you going to get from here to, and that's just something to appreciate, that normally, and each startup has a different journey, but there are iterations in the funding kind of journey that companies go on. How would I put it? I'd say the same thing to some degree about customers as I would about investors. Companies often think in terms of who their ideal customer would be when they're at a very early stage. But what I'm sometimes more interested in is, well, that's very nice, but who is the easiest customer for you to sell to, and could you just get them on board first before you sell to Microsoft? But same thing with investors. We'd all love to have whatever Silicon Valley based VC invest 10 million in us, but maybe they're not quite ready for that yet, so maybe we shouldn't waste our time with it. As in, focus on the types of investors that will allocate capital to a company that is at the stage you're at presently. If you're pre-revenue, then don't waste your time, because the thing with fundraising is that it is very time consuming. And nobody sets up a company so that they can spend 6 months of the year preparing investment pitches. So try and do a critical evaluation of who is in the investment community, who will not invest in me at the moment. Let's not waste too much time with them. Focus on companies that could, or entities that could potentially invest.
And Billy, around the phases, right? I love the advice, by the way, Billy. This is what the podcast is about, reading that, giving those gems, because this day you said it. All of us would love to have A16, Sequoia, etc. on our cap table, but maybe we're not ready yet for that, right? Next phase as Enterprise Island, or next phase of the fintech industry, right? I know you mentioned the bridges. What other things do you think that we could do as an industry, right? To really advance ourselves and position ourselves as being potentially the center of excellence of fintech. I hate to use that word, center of excellence, but for fintech in Ireland, for Europe as a gateway, right? Amsterdam are doing quite well.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
how can we punch like Amsterdam, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think to that point, Money 2020 is
Have
a
one here.
big global event, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Amsterdam is a big fintech center. You know what I mean? It's for me, going back to the international marketing piece, that what I didn't touch on there is that that ambition to really scale globally, to go for the large companies, and it's a journey. You have to sell to the small ones and the medium-sized ones before you have the credibility to go for the real blue chips, that sort of stuff. And having that ambition to scale globally, and that's not just at an individual company level. It's the wider industry as well. How is
Yes.
Ireland promoted? And to give credit, we have Minister Carol McNeill, is our incumbent Minister for Financial Services, and she does an absolutely fantastic job, I'd have to say, in promoting Irish companies overseas. She's given us a lot of support whenever we're attending events like Money 2020. But it's having that ambition, and stepping back from it as well. A lot of the clients that I've worked with over the years have exited, and they've decided they've been acquired, and you can understand why people do that, because it is such an all-consuming kind of journey in being a founder. But nonetheless, for the Irish industry to make that next step, then we need to move away from being the acquired towards being the acquirers. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. The ambition, and also
Yeah.
why don't we stay the course, go global, right?
Yeah.
And continuously, who knows, some IPOs, in whichever stock exchange we choose to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Billy, so Billy,
Course.
where can people find you? Where can people find you? Where are you hanging out mainly, right? Is it on LinkedIn?
Oh, LinkedIn. Yeah, it's a good. I mean, we're based in East Point, as you know, and we try and get out and about to as many events as we can. But LinkedIn is the place. Yeah.
I appreciate it again. That's the pod.